kind of a random question for you guys. Have you ever wondered if you could rig an old bicycle to a broken blender and pedal it to make juice? Have you ever wondered that? No? Y'all are weird. No, I'm just kidding. That's a really random thing to ask, but I actually know someone who did wonder that one time, and that's a story that I'll share in a little bit. But as absurd of a question as that is, it's something that's really at the crux of what we need to talk about this morning. As a culture, we are always on the go. Right? I'm constantly moving. I feel like my entire week is just a blur of moving from one thing to the next without ever stopping. And the interesting thing to me, though, about that is that we all say that. All of us complain about that, and none of us ever change it. Or we are addicted to the noise. On days where there's nothing going on, we almost don't even know what to do with ourselves. So we immediately fill up a day off with activities. Right? As a culture, we have convinced ourselves that if we aren't busy, we aren't valuable. And you see this all the time. Right? A family that doesn't fill up their time with stuff can almost be looked down upon. Or if you're alone at your house on a Friday night, you must be sad. Right? If you were actually important, you would have people constantly vying for your attention, right? Or if you really loved your kids, you would be filling up their days with activities, wouldn't you? If you aren't busy, you aren't valuable. But the truth that God points us to is the exact opposite of that. And that if we are too busy, we have essentially become worthless to His purpose. The biggest truth about time in any aspect of our lives is that noise is toxic to growth, which might at least partially explain our addiction to it. In 1 Kings 19, there's this popular story where Elijah is hiding in a mountain and there's this big storm and an earthquake and a fire. And after all of these things, it says, but God wasn't in the wind. God wasn't in the earthquake or the fire. Do you guys remember where Elijah ultimately met God? You heard that story? Yeah, there's this small, quiet whisper. And the important part of that story, I think, is the context and the repetition. Right? Elijah just outdid the prophets of Baal, calling down fire from heaven. It's a fun story. You can read about it in 1 Kings 18. But now people are mad at him. He's running for his life, they're trying to kill him. Right? And so he hears this voice from God as he's running saying, Elijah, what are you doing? And he yells out to God, he's like, I have been your faithful servant. I'm doing what you asked me to do, but these people are trying to kill me. So God sends him up this mountain. They have this little experience. And then God asks him again the same question. Elijah, what are you doing? And Elijah's response again is the same. I've been your faithful servant. I'm doing what you asked me to do, but these people are trying to kill me. But this time, God tells him what to do next. The reality of the story is that nothing about Elijah's plight or his mission from God changes. But God needed him to slow down and take a breath and refocus, or Elijah would have never been able to do what God needed him to do. Because noise is toxic to growth. So throughout these past 2 semesters, we've been randomly taking breaks in whatever we're talking about to include pieces of this series that we call Help Me Navigate This, where we're just taking the time to start a conversation about some of the things going on in our culture. And today I'm going to talk about something very near to my heart. It's a convergence of a lot of things I'm incredibly passionate about, and over the past few years have been doing a lot of study on. But today I need to start a conversation about establishing a healthy relationship with technology. Because nothing is adding more noise to our lives than technology, and noise is toxic to growth. Now, before I get into it, and you immediately just want to disengage with me, I want to caveat this. Everything that I say this morning comes with a me too. Because I am bad about having a healthy relationship with things like this. And at no point this morning am I trying to sound like that curmudgeonly old man that just hates these newfangled machines, okay? I'm going to sound like that a lot. That's not at all where I'm coming from. I know Corey and Sean like to make fun of me that I'm the only member of our teaching team that doesn't use an iPad or a computer up here for my notes. Like, I use paper, but I will say Corey's computer shut off on him randomly from stage a couple of weeks ago. I like paper. But anyway, I'm not anti-tech, I promise. I just like paper, which is technology too. But I said I feel like I need to talk about this, and I'm not using that word need frivolously. From 2009 to 2021, the share of American high school students who say they feel persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness rose from low 20% to over 44%. This is the highest level of teenage sadness ever recorded. The United States is experiencing an extreme teenage mental health crisis. This survey found a great deal of variation in mental health among different groups, and I do have the demographic breakdowns if you want them, but the big picture is the same across every category. Almost every measure of mental health is getting worse for every teenage demographic all across the country. Since 2009, sadness and hopelessness have increased for every race, for straight teens and gay teens, males and females, and the ones that say they don't know what they are yet, for teens who say they've never had sex, ones that have, teens involved in sports, teens heavily involved in church, teens that have no religious affiliation whatsoever. There is no breakdown that we have been able to find where things are not getting consistently worse for students of all ages in all 50 states and in the District of Columbia. We need to talk about this. And it's not just a teen issue, not even close. There's a QR code on your tables. It's also on this slide right here. I'm going to reference a lot of studies, a lot of articles, and a lot of books. They are all linked through this. If you scan that or just look up the link that's written down there, you'll be able to find that. I actually woke up this morning thinking of a few things that I left off of that page, so I might even be adding to it throughout this week, but I left out so much from this sermon that it's physically painful to me. So please, everything that I reference and more is listed on that page. I don't want you to just take my word for any of it. I think this is important. I would highly encourage you to look into it a little bit this week for yourself and fact check me. All right, so I know I led off this morning by talking about bicycles and broken blenders, and maybe it feels like we've strayed pretty far away from that at this point, but I promise we haven't. Because here's the main thing that I need us to all understand this morning is that technology disciples us. And disciples as in it affects the way that we think and the way that we behave. All right? Much like a disciple is supposed to slowly, over time, look like his discipler. Right, the simple and classic example of this is if we take something as benign as the interstate, right? Raise your hand if you spend a lot of time in your day thinking about how the interstate has impacted your life. Hopefully you don't. Right, when there's traffic and it's moving slow, that doesn't really count. That's something different. The reality is that my life has gone the way that it's gone largely because the interstate exists. I went to college where I did, studied under, was discipled by the people I was, largely because it was accessible to me. And then I lived there for 12 years, got married there, had a child there, away from my family. You know, it wasn't that long ago in our history that families didn't stray all that far from each other. That's a little bit more commonplace to see now. Now, is that inherently a bad thing? Not at all. All right, but are we thinking about this? Have we taken the time to think about what this thing that has added things to our lives is also taking away? Because if we don't think about it, if we don't acknowledge it, we have no power against it. This is true of all technology. The only difference between growth and conformity is your brain. So with all technology, there's some questions that are important to ask. The promise of technology is that it makes life easier. But the lie of technology is that it always makes life better. And we need to be able to ask, what is this replacing? The interstate makes travel easier, I see that, but what is this replacing? Is this removing, either directly or indirectly, something from my life that I would like to keep? How am I being discipled by this? Netflix replaced Blockbuster, right? Netflix is way easier. You can binge watch shows now. That's pretty cool. Blockbuster was kind of an experience, though. Right? It was a whole family trip. You went there, you walked through, you looked at all the movies, and there was the massive aisle of candy and popcorn. If anybody is under the age of 18 in here, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But it was so cool, right? Netflix simplified this process. And it gave us the ability to binge watch things that we never had that opportunity before. But it also unintentionally removed some things, right? Like the anticipation of waiting, the excitement, right? So does that mean I can't use Netflix? No. But if there's something about the experience it replaced that it took away unintentionally and I want to continue, I need to actively make thoughts and efforts to keep it a part of my life. This is a dumb but obvious example, and this applies to all technology, and I'm obviously going to focus on digital technology for our time this morning, but if you're one in here that doesn't have a smartphone or doesn't watch a lot of TV, play video games, whatever, that doesn't mean this conversation isn't relevant. We all use technology. All right, so what is this replacing in there? Are there things about the replaced thing that I want to keep? Asking those questions can help us keep from being blindly steered by technology. So what kind of disciples does our technology make? How is this making us look like itself? All right, how is this tool using us when we aren't using our brains to protect us from that? Well, we've become exceedingly distracted. All right, researchers recruited 520 undergraduate students and gave them 2 standardized tests of intellectual acuity. One gauged available cognitive capacity, a measure of how fully a person's mind can focus on a particular task. The second test assessed fluid intelligence, a person's ability to interpret and solve an unfamiliar problem. The only variable in the experiment was the location of the subject's smartphones. All right, some of them were asked to set it on the table in view, not use it, not turn it on, just where they can see it. Others were asked to stow it in pockets or handbags, while others were asked to leave it in a separate room entirely. The results were striking. Universally, there was no variation in the subjects. Universally, the subjects whose smartphone was in view posted the worst scores. The ones who left it in a different room entirely posted the best scores, and the ones who had it hidden but on them were right in the middle. As the phone's proximity increased, brain power decreased. And this was not a study done on teenagers. Almost 70% of parents check their phones at least once per hour. Over 50% of teenagers say that they find their parent to be distracted by their own phone. We are modeling this behavior. We like to pick on kids for doing it. We are modeling this to them. I remember before Asa was even 2 years old, we had this moment. We were alone at home. He was playing by himself, entertaining himself. He was pretty good at that. He didn't always need us to engage with him. So I was just sitting on the couch mindlessly scrolling through Facebook or something. And you know how when you're really laser focused on something, people can be talking to you and you don't hear it until you snap out of the zone, and then you're like, oh yeah, I heard you. I had that experience with him. I was sitting on my phone and he was calling my name. He's saying, Dad, 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 Dad. Until he came up to me, pulled the phone out of my face, and got in my face and said, Dad. And I felt about this big. And my not even 2-year-old feels like he has to compete with my phone for my attention. Now, that hurt. Now, I want to give us several challenges today. Because not because I want us to take them all, I just want us all to pick one. One of several challenges to have a healthier relationship with technology so we can start steering technology instead of the other way around. My first one comes from a seminar I was at where I was learning about some of this stuff, and I want to share one of the suggestions from the leader. He said when he's at home, he puts the phone in his bedroom. I started doing that for a short time, and I unfortunately got out of this habit. But I noticed that I felt compelled to check my phone less simply because it wasn't near me anymore. And I was more present with my family. And I know what a lot of you might be thinking in this moment. I promise it's okay 90% of the time if work can't reach you. I know we've convinced ourselves if we aren't busy, we aren't valuable. But you probably actually aren't that important. I do mean that lovingly, right? And what's happening at home is probably more important than whoever it is that's trying to reach you. I led off this morning talking about the state of mental health in teens. In her study, generational psychologist and sociologist Jean Twenge noticed something odd about the trends of mental health and other things with this group growing up now as opposed to generations before. In her words, around 2012, I noticed abrupt shifts in teen behaviors and emotional states. The gentle slopes of the line grass became steep mountains and sheer cliffs, and many of the distinctive characteristics of the millennial generation began to disappear. In all my analyses of generational data, some reaching back to the 1930s, I had never seen anything like it. Do you guys know what major milestone occurred in America in 2012? iPhone was released in 2007. 2012 was when over 50%, for the first time, over 50% of Americans owned a smartphone. It took 5 years. That was really fast. Why this is generally regarded as the most successful product launch of all time. But we've all unwittingly submitted ourselves to a grand social experiment, and the results aren't that great. Just look at these charts that she's referencing. This one is talking about likeliness for a teenager to feel lonely. Now, what's normal to see in generational data is stuff like this. 2007, the iPhone is released. This is 2012, when it became statistically likely that a teenager would own a smartphone. All right, now I wanted to reference all of these slides and talk about the implications of each one of them, but I just don't have time for that. I do have these linked on that QR code. I would encourage you to please read it, but every single one of them looks exactly like this. All right, if we want to continue to think that these are just benign devices that do not have the potential to impact us profoundly, and we don't want to give the time and the thought to it, we are being destructively naive. This isn't even just a small subset of the population, it's nearing a majority. But Twenge also found in her generational studies that this current generation of kids that's growing up works for pay less than their predecessors, but they're roughly spending the same amount of time on homework, the same amount of time involved in sports and other clubs and activities. These kids, compared to previous generations, believe it or not, have more leisure time, not less. Yet they feel busy and consumed, so what are they doing with their free time? They don't hang out with their friends as much, they don't party as much, they drink less, that's good, right? But most of their time is spent on their phone, usually alone, in their room, often distressed. All right, parents, if your kid is alone in their room with a phone, they're likely not feeling very good. So what does this distraction do to our relationship with God? How is this noise being toxic to us spiritually? If we see all of these examples physiologically, and I'll get into more in just a minute, but Bob Goff in one of his books writes this: the opposite of hope isn't despair, it's distraction. Think about that for just a little bit. When I'm focused so much on the other things that I lose sight of Jesus, that's leading me away from hope, from the one that gives us hope. All right, we're so laser focused on our phones that we lose focus of the most important things in our lives, God included. If Jesus is supposed to be the first priority in my life, that doesn't mean that I have to give this up. There's a lot of great things that I can do with this for my relationship with Jesus, but it does mean that I have to make it obedient to him. Which means we're controlling it, not the other way around. When Jesus helps Peter walk on water, when was the point that Peter started drowning? When he turned away from Jesus, when he became distracted by all of the noise around him. Do we really think that this thing consuming so much of our time and attention is not capable of potentially hurting the way that we interact with Christ? Are we really going to just think so little about that before we adopt it? All of these things work together to create another way that this tech disciples us that I've alluded to already. We're a lot more depressed and addicted. Those two things do typically go hand in hand. 8th graders who are heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 27%. while those who play sports, go to religious services, or even do homework cut their risk significantly. I had a conversation a couple of years ago at my last church with some parents whose daughter was struggling really hard with depression and anxiety. And she was one that would show me her screen time every week. A lot of my students would show me their screen time on Sunday mornings because it was kind of fun and I would make fun of them. But she was one, her average screen time per day was a little over 12 hours. All right, now the average teenager is screen time on their phone every day is nearly 7.5 hours, not a whole lot better than that. But I remember one week, her social media usage, specifically Snapchat, in 1 week totaled 26 hours. And she had no mental health issues just 2 years prior before she had gotten her first phone. And the most painful thing about this was in my interaction with her parents, they didn't want to take it away. You know, they said, "Oh, we don't want to punish her for feeling this way." Parents, please hear me. I know I'm not the parent of a teenager yet, but it's not a punishment to remove poison from your kid's life. Not every teen, not every kid reacts to social media negatively. They don't. But this one was. Ryan Bierwinkle, a licensed counselor from Denver that I consulted with for this message, told me the breakthrough in counseling happens when a person realizes that the pain of changing will be less than the pain of continuing what they have always done. As adults, we get to choose what pain we enter into, and stepping away from tech so that we can be more present for our kids or to give our kids an opportunity to be healthier is a pain worth embracing. And it's not just teens. A study randomly assigned 1,095 Danish adults to stop using Facebook for 1 week. That was the experimental group, or to continue using Facebook as usual, the control group. At the end of 1 week, those who had taken a break from Facebook alone were happier, less lonely, and less depressed than those who had used Facebook as usual, and by pretty substantial margins. 36% fewer were lonely, 33% fewer were depressed, and 9% were more happy. Those who stayed off Facebook were also less likely to feel sad, angry, or worried. I'm not even getting into the other ways that social media is degrading our American culture as adults. One of the articles I linked extensively looks into that topic. I would really encourage you to read it. In her book, Jean Twenge wrote this: "If you're going to give advice for a happy life, it would be pretty straightforward. Put down the phone, turn off the computer or iPad, and do anything that does not involve a screen." Here's another challenge that you might want to take me up on. This is actually going to be mine for the next month because I know I need it. Take a social media fast. Get off of it, all of it, for at least 21 days. And see how you feel. Or see how your kids feel. Even if you force it on them, we might be surprised. Or we have a student here, Wade Ross. He just graduated high school, and he and I were talking late after youth group one night, and we found out that we have kind of a similar favorite way of connecting with God. And just in talking, he had this great idea to do some outdoor activities through the summer. All right, so here's your invitation, all of you. Everyone is invited. Several Wednesday mornings we're going to meet this summer. I know a lot of you work, but check our schedule. Maybe one of them sounds fun enough for you to take off for. But if you're able to at all, I would love for you to come. We're going to meet here Wednesday mornings. One day we're going to go do the incline. Another day we're going to go take a more leisurely hike. Right? Another time we'll go fishing. We'll go biking. No skills needed. Just anybody who wants to get outside, slow down, quiet down, and connect with God in the beauty of creation. If you'd ever love to join us, check the events section of our app. It's all listed in there. Now, I wanted to get into the neuroscience of dopamine and serotonin and how addictive behaviors influence our brain chemicals' ability to regulate mood. I don't have time, but feel free to read about it. It's fascinating. But suffice to say here, we, not only teens, many of us adults too, have a legitimate addiction to our phones. Like literally, we have a legitimate chemical addiction. And here's the problem. With an alcoholic, you don't typically let them keep booze in their house. We cannot expect our teens to regulate themselves into healthier rhythms. It has to be taken away. It's not that this is evil, right? This thing isn't evil. It's pretty neutral. There's a lot of good things that I can do with it, and I know a lot of teens say they like to use it as their alarm clock. There's other alarm clocks. We can figure that out. But they aren't in trouble for using it. But when we see that this thing is hurting them, the most loving thing that we can do is take it away. Right? We don't expect alcoholics to behave well with drinks in the home. We need to understand the science of addiction and work as parents to help give them tools to become emotionally intelligent and stable adults. And for some, the first step is detox. Now, for some teens, there's no amount of social media activity that's healthy. Others, that's not true. And there is a difference between social media and screen time. Screens have been around for a very long time, and that has been studied extensively. Screen time in general, whether it be video games, phone, TV, whatever, seems that the cutoff appears to be around 2 hours. Right, this is not universal, but the majority of people experience no increased risk of mental health issues or behavioral issues, lessened focus, irritability, worsening ADHD symptoms, etc., under 2 hours a day. Again, for you, that might be more or less. I think you can kind of feel that. Another challenge here might be to simply start paying more attention to our screen time. How much are we on our phones, on our TVs, and simply find a way to start systematically reducing that. I know we love these things. We love to do these things. There's nothing wrong with being on your phone. There's nothing wrong with watching movies. There's nothing wrong with playing video games until they start controlling us. And again, I am drawing a distinction with social media and screen time. Twitch and YouTube fit the genre of social media and tend to be the platforms that teen boys prefer. But social media's effect is a lot more dramatic and fast, even on adults. But what does phone addiction or addiction of any kind do to our relationship with God? You know, a line that's been used a lot with me in my past from some of my professors is, what you worship, you become. You become like what you worship. So what consumes the majority of your thoughts, the majority of your time, your actions, the thing you choose to fix your eyes on and exalt, like Sean likes to define worship, you become like these things. And we see this playing out in our culture, so how do we fight that? Well, addiction needs to be replaced with something. You can't just create that void in your life. It needs to be replaced with something. So what am I replacing that with? This would be a great place to start. This is a screen time report. All of your phones will give this to you. I am amazed at how much time in a week I can find by looking at this. That girl I told you about, she could find an entire extra day per week if she just cut out Snapchat. And I liked to make fun of her for that until I looked at mine, and then I was like, crap. But we can't just walk away from something. We have to fill it with something else. So what are we saying yes to? The problem is that most of our time fills up thoughtlessly by default like this. But every time we say yes to something, it's important to remember that you're saying no to every other possible thing you could be doing in that moment. I'm the kind of person that doesn't like saying no to people, so this is advice that's been given to me many times. When you say yes, you are also saying no. What are you guys doing right now? You're sitting in here listening to a sermon, whether you like it or not. There are realistically, legitimately, probably 100 other things you could be doing with your time right now. But you're not, because you said yes to this. So what are we saying yes to? We need to thoughtfully fill this time, because when we don't, it gets filled, and usually, by default, by things we don't say are important to us. And we lose focus on Jesus, and we run out of time for Jesus almost by accident. Which leads into my last point. We've also become increasingly busy. Or we buy into the lie that our tech is helping us work less. It's not. Now, I already suggested work doesn't need to reach us at all times, but it's not just that. It's everything. And everyone, all at once, at all times. We're filling up our schedules with more and more things, trying to keep up with every and any experience for ourselves and every possible experience for our kids, and it's killing us. Not only are we doing so many things, but we're so engaged in the tech that's supposed to be making these things quicker and easier. If you are an average smartphone using adult, you will pick up and check your phone 30,000 times this year. That's an average adult. as a culture, we have convinced ourselves that if we aren't busy, we aren't valuable. It's also true in church. It's like this American belief system that we don't even realize is there. Busyness is next to godliness. And that couldn't be further from the truth, but look no further than your calendar and recognize that you and me, we live our lives by that falsehood. But nothing will damage your relationship with God or your spouse, your parents, your kids, or your ability to impact the world more than busyness. Because noise is toxic to growth. And the things that God calls us to, servanthood, taking care of the sick, of widows, generosity, relational discipleship, we don't have the margin in our lives for any of that. Elijah was so busy running for his life that God had to force him to slow down and listen for a whisper. Remember, God is not in, his voice is not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Once we quiet down, then he will speak. And I'm not suggesting that we slow down so that we attend more church things. That's still just busy. I cannot express enough how important it is to just be quiet and alone sometimes. How can we ever expect to hear the voice of God in our lives when we're constantly running? Maybe the best thing we can do for ourselves is take the time to turn everything off and be a little bored. I pray a lot more when I'm outside with nothing else to do. It's funny how that works. Boredom is actually really good for relationships. It forces communication, it forces creativity. And if there's one family activity that I would like to suggest to everyone in here, it would be something that was suggested to me a couple of years ago, and that's embrace boredom together. Boredom is actually essential in childhood development. We are robbing our kids of this. Ryan Bierwinkle, the licensed counselor I referenced, he told me this: what fires in your brain wires in your brain. If we want to wonder why kids are so good at tech, it's because they're using it. It's firing in their brain constantly. If you want to know why they're not good at engaging with other human beings face to face, they've never had the opportunity, right? Boredom is essential to developing creativity. If they never have boredom, they never have the opportunity for these neurons to fire. It's essential for childhood development. We're robbing our kids of this. I don't know of any studies here, but anecdotally, I know of 3 families who tried removing toys from their kids 5 years and down. They took away everything that wasn't a stuffed animal, and all 3 of these families reported an interesting finding. Within just a couple of days, their kids were requesting more art and craft activities, trying to be more creative. They were playing outside more. They were using their imagination more. One woman said that her kid actually flipped a chair upside down and sat inside of it and played with it, pretending it was a car. Never had done that before. Right? They were less irritable, more obedient, and read more books because they took away toys and let their kids figure out what to do with their boredom. Embrace boredom. And I'm not suggesting we take all of our kids' toys away, but this was a conversation I had multiple times with my parents, like when Asa was 3 months old for his first Christmas and they're buying him all these toys. I'm like, I don't know that he needs this, but whatever. This was a suggestion that was made to me by a guy named Eric Epperson. He's the creative director for CIY, Christ in Youth, one of the most creative Christian organizations around. He told me a story about his young daughter. I think he said she was about 8 years old at the time. I can't really remember, but they had settled into this routine that he thought was really good and healthy. She would come home from school. She would get her homework done. Once she was done with that, she was allowed to play on her iPad until he came home at dinner time. Then they had family time, dinner time and family time together for the rest of the evening, no screens allowed. He really liked this system that they had built up, but then he realized she had every moment of her day planned for her. He was unintentionally robbing her of something that he thought was essential for her development, boredom. So he adjusted her rules for a little while. When she came home, she did her homework. She was never allowed to play games on her iPad during that time before he got home. A couple of days per week, she wasn't actually allowed to do anything, like not read a book or not anything that existed, nothing that she was able to consume. Right? She had to come up with what to do all by herself. It took 3 days. 3 days. She comes running up to him when he gets home right before dinner time. She says, Dad, do you remember that broken blender that's out in the garage? Right? It had been broken for about a year at this point. He put it in the garage intending to fix it and subsequently forgot all about it. That sounds familiar. He says, yeah, I remember that blender now. Do you think Do you think that there's a way we can rig up my bicycle and make juice with it? I said, that's not really a normal 8-year-old question to ask. That's not the kind of question you ask after you've been playing games on your iPad. That's only a question you ask if you're bored. So they did that. That night, after dinner, they lifted her bicycle, they found a way to rig up the gears, and they made juice that night with her bicycle and a broken blender, and they have a memory that they're going to cherish for the rest of their lives. That doesn't happen unless you're bored, because noise is toxic to growth. Now, there are 3 moments that immediately come to mind anytime people ask me about my favorite memories of dorm life in college. All of them happened simply because everyone in the dorm was bored all at the same time, which is kind of a miracle that it happened ever, considering all the possibilities we have for entertainment available to us. It was usually when the internet wasn't working. But these only happened because a whole group of guys were stuck together bored. I would really love to share the stories, but I'm going to have to save that for another time. I don't remember all of the nights that we played video games together. I don't remember the nights that we watched movies together or even did last-minute homework together. All of those were essential for us bonding and becoming friends, but I don't remember them. I do remember the times that we were bored, and we created memories together. Boredom is a blessing and something that I don't want to mindlessly allow to be removed from my life or my kids' lives. What is this unintentionally removing from my life? Turns out something that I think is actually really important. You know, there's another student here, Danica Spain. She just got baptized a couple of weeks ago, and in a couple more weeks is going to be baptizing one of her friends. But Danica loves volleyball. And she was involved in actually multiple teams, but it wasn't that long ago that she was telling me that she was thinking about quitting one of her teams, not because there's anything wrong with volleyball, but because she didn't like being so busy and feeling like she didn't have time for things that she thought were ultimately more important. And it wasn't a week later that she came to me with this brilliant idea that she wants to do more service-oriented projects in our city. So here's your invitation. Right, several Thursday mornings this summer, Danica is leading a group of people that want to go around and clean our city up a little bit. And I know, again, most of you are working, but if you can, I would love it if you came even just once, because I want to support her, because I don't think it's a coincidence that this happened 1 week after she created more margin in her life. And I couldn't possibly be prouder of her. I love it when teenagers lead the way in these things and teach us lessons that we should be teaching them. But I hope you're hearing my heart in all of this morning. And I hope you realize I'm not trying to stand up here and give us the one solution for how to deal with technology. I don't know what that is. If I knew, I would do it, maybe, because I am bad at being good with these things. But I do have some challenges for us. Not because technology is evil, but because it is discipling us. And we need to create a healthier relationship here. So maybe we want to just put the phones in your room when you're at home. Or maybe a variation of that is just not having phones out at dinner time. You ever see that in a restaurant when a couple is sitting there and they're not even talking? They're just on their phone? That's painful. Right? Or maybe you want to take a technology fast, whether it be social media, the phone, computer, TV, Xbox. You know your drug. Choose accordingly. And the studies suggest that maybe our goals should be under 2 hours of screen time a day, right? But again, you know what's healthy there. Maybe you can set that rhythm for yourself. And embrace boredom. Embrace boredom, or even create a weekly rhythm that is not tech dependent. What's one thing as a family we can do per week where we are not using technology, where we are giving our brains an opportunity to have these neurons fire? Or create sacred times, places, or people. What I mean by that, there's certain people in my life that when I'm with them, I should just have the phone away. Or maybe there's a time, maybe for you, it's like a vacation you're going to take this summer. Hey, we're not going to have phones out at this time. I love making kids put their phones away when I take them up to camp. right? Create sacred times, places, and people. What would happen? What would happen if we were to do even just some of these things? Please don't listen to this message and walk away and never think about it again. Look into some of this stuff and choose one of these things, because what would happen? What if we became a group of people that actually had a healthy relationship with technology and no longer just allowed ourselves to be discipled by it? Maybe we would be a happier group. Maybe there would be less divisiveness, less sadness. Maybe this would be a place full of kids who are able to grow into emotionally intelligent and stable adults a whole head and shoulders above their peers in that category. Maybe we could reduce, not eliminate, reduce our kids' chances of anxiety, depression, and suicide. Maybe we would have time to engage with our families. Maybe we would have the margin to actually be used by God to do His will and advance His kingdom. Maybe we would have time to influence someone and lead them to Christ. Serve the people around us. Maybe we would be able to realize creative potential. Maybe we would feel less stress. Maybe we would just help each other more. Maybe we would become the kind of people that make juice with old bicycles and broken blenders. Will you pray with me? God, I'm just so grateful for everything that you do for us, for all of the blessings that you've given us. God, I'm grateful for our creativity and our ability to invent these things, but God, I'm also sorry for the times that we allow them to influence us thoughtlessly. God, I'm sorry for how much time I waste every single week. God, I just ask that as we move forward, Lord, that you give us wisdom and knowledge just to know how we can create a healthier relationship with these things so that we can have a healthier relationship with each other and ultimately with you. God, we love you so much, and it's in your name that we pray. Amen.